Chapter 15. Take care of yourselves, Mary says, while shaking hands with their 4 new friends. You do the same, Stefi says. Remember, if you see anyone except a military or National Guard vehicle, don't let them see you. We got it, Bill says. Thanks. You're welcome, and good luck. You too, Nick says. I hope you find what you're looking for. Thanks, John says, before walking around to the driver's side of the Scout and climbing in. Bye, Jake says out the back window, waving to them. Bye, Jake, Julia says. Take care of your mom and your grandpa. I will. John backs up into one of the empty camper spaces, slips the Scout into drive, and heads down the narrow, bumpy road back to the highway. I don't like leaving them here, Robin says, as she watches them out of the back window. I know, but we don't have a choice, Mary replies. Doesn't mean I have to like it. No, it doesn't. They should be okay. I hope so, Robin says, before falling silent again. After they get back to the main road, John drives for a little while through the increasingly thick forest, looking for anything that seems familiar. But for the first 2 hours, there's nothing. They continue to follow the slow curves and gentle rise and fall of the road well into the morning, encountering less than 3 abandoned vehicles along the way. And then they spot a plume of thick black smoke in the distance. What could that be? Mary asks. There's no towns up here, right? No, there's nothing for miles and miles, John replies, while studying the dark, foreboding smoke that seems to hang over a section of the forest, like a dark storm cloud. They come to the top of a small rise, and John hits the brakes suddenly, and the Scout skids to a stop. Jesus Christ, John mutters. What is it? Robin asks as she looks up from her book and peers through the windshield. What is that? Dozens of trees are strewn across the highway, about half a mile further on, sheared off and scattered like toothpicks. Some of them are burning, outlining a path of destruction that leads deeper into the woods, where the smoke originates. Go slow, Mary says, as she gazes at the scene of devastation in front of them. John nods, and they roll slowly down the hill toward the fallen trees. The closer they get, the tighter John's stomach gets. He moves onto the shoulder to avoid a particularly large pine tree laying across the road. A white piece of metal is twisted around the top branches of the tree. It's a plane, isn't it? Mary asks. I think so, John replies, as they move deeper into the field of destruction. When they're directly in the middle of it, Robin leans out her window and peers into the woods off to the right. I can see it, she says. At least some of it. The tops of dozens of evergreens are missing, torn off by the impact. Mary opens her door and starts to step out when John grabs her arm. Where are you going? I want to see if there might be survivors, she says, frowning at him. We're not going down there. We can't just leave them. Yes, we can. If someone is alive, we have to help them, she says, the anger in her voice growing slowly. If someone is alive and they're injured, what are you planning on doing? We can't take them with us. We only have a little first aid kit, and there could be hundreds of victims. From the looks of it, this happened recently, and that means that someone may come looking for the plane. They can't find us here. She glares at him for a moment before looking back at the burning section of trees. We can't just leave them, she says again, but quieter. I know, honey, John says, his voice sad and sympathetic. We have to go, Mom, Robin says, water welling in her eyes. Mary looks at her dad and then slowly closes the door as she settles back into her seat. Robin puts her hand on her shoulder, and Mary covers it with her own hand before the tears begin. John presses the gas pedal and they start moving forward, the Scout climbing over some of the fallen branches, while John steers around the larger ones. A few moments later, they reach the end of the crash site, and John speeds up, trying to get as far from the area as they can before anyone shows up to investigate. "Are you sure we didn't miss it?" Mary asks a few hours later. "Honestly, no, I'm not." John frowns as they continue down the highway, venturing further into the unknown. This area is so isolated that they haven't even passed a mile sign for a town the entire day. There seems to be nothing but trees and mountains that go on forever and ever. "Maybe we should turn around," Robin suggests. John shakes his head. "It has to be up here somewhere," he mumbles to himself. They pass a large boulder on the right side of the road, and John slams on the brakes. Jake nearly falls on the floor, and Mary grabs the dashboard to avoid hitting the windshield. "Damn it, Dad," she says. "That's it," he says, turning around in his seat and looking back at the huge stone nearly enveloped by trees and other greenery. "What is, the rock?" "Yeah," he replies, turning the wheel and heading back. When they reach the boulder, he stops the truck and climbs out, walking over to the massive stone. "I don't see any road," Mary says as she opens her door. "I'm sure this is it," John says, as he walks along the edge of the highway. He stands for a few moments before stepping down into the weed-choked shoulder and pulling back some thin branches and vines. "Dad, what are you doing?" Mary asks. He continues clearing away the undergrowth, seemingly ignoring her question, and slowly, a crude dirt road is revealed that appears to lead up into the woods. "This is it," John says, turning back to Mary. "You're sure? It's a road, isn't it?" "Sort of," she chuckles. "What do we got to lose?" Robin asks. "Just ourselves," Mary replies with a sly grin. "Come on, guys, help me clear some of this," John says, "and grab the axe." The kids jump out, and Robin heads around to the back and grabs the axe before heading over to where John is pulling small saplings and weed trees and tossing them off to the side. Mary stands by the truck, watching the road while they work alongside John. 10 minutes later, they all climb back into the Scout, and John turns onto the dirt road, the truck tipping dangerously forward as it leaves the highway. As it settles back down, the tires dig into the loose dirt, and the Scout surges forward. Not far from the main road, the trail widens, and the trees and other undergrowth recede slightly. "I'm still not sure about this," Mary says, watching out the window as they move deeper into the woods. "I am," John says, undeterred. "There's nothing here but trees and weeds. I told you it was pretty far off the beaten path." "Off the beaten path is one thing, this is something else," she says, just as they hit a massive pothole and the whole truck dips violently to one side, and then rights itself a few seconds later. "Grandpa!" Robin complains from the back. Sorry, he says, while trying to concentrate on the so-called road. "Is that what I think it is?" Mary asks, pointing straight ahead, at what appears to be a white metal gate, partially obscured by weeds and tangled undergrowth. "It looks like a gate to me." John stops the Scout and climbs out, leaving the engine running. He starts toward the barrier, but before he even takes 2 steps, several heavily armed men and women rush out of the woods, surrounding the Scout. "Don't," one of the men says as John turns to reach inside the cabin for his pistol. He freezes in place, locking eyes with Mary. She has her hand on her Beretta, but he shakes his head at her. "Fuck," he says, before closing his eyes. Chapter 16. "Everyone out of the truck," one of the men says, while standing directly behind John, a pistol in his hand. He's large, more than 6 feet tall, with massive arms bulging with muscles. He looks sort of like a Viking, with the beads that are braided into his impressive beard. "Listen, we don't have to do this," John says, while looking at Mary and his grandchildren. "This is just a misunderstanding." "We'll see about that." "We were just looking for something," Mary says from her seat. The man behind John frowns at her. "You were looking for something in the woods down an abandoned road?" he says, scoffing at her response. A young woman on Mary's side of the truck laughs. "What were you looking for?" she asks. "We were trying to find a place called the Homestead," John says. And suddenly, all the laughter and small talk passing between the other men and women immediately ceases. "Why were you trying to find this homestead?" the big man asks, some of his tough and stoic demeanor falling away. "My dad owns, or I guess he used to own it." The big man looks across the hood of the Scout toward the girl, and then he swallows hard. "Your dad, what was his name?" "Trevor Williamson." Several of the men and women begin whispering amongst themselves. "Oh, well, I think you should probably come with us," he says, his tone sounding more like a request rather than an order. "And if we say no?" John asks, and Mary tenses up. Can you please come with us?" John looks at Mary, and she tilts her head to the side. "Well?" John mouths to her. She shrugs and shakes her head. "Okay," John finally replies, and the big man looks incredibly relieved. "Would it be okay if Lori rode with you to help you with directions?" the Viking asks quietly. Sure." She nods and then hands a rifle to one of the other girls and opens the back door. "Robin, can you slide over?" Mary asks. "Oh yeah, sorry," she says, before scooting across the seat closer to Jake. Lori climbs in and closes the door, folding her hands in her lap. She's a pretty girl, probably in her early to mid-20s, with long brown hair pulled back into a neatly braided ponytail. Her bright green eyes sparkle under her dark eyebrows. "She'll guide you," the big man says. "Get the gate open." A couple of the others rush over and pull the gate back. "Okay. What's your name, by the way?" John asks. "Victor," he replies. "All right, Victor, my name's John," he says, offering his hand. He shakes it, but he seems timid compared to how he was just a few minutes earlier. "I know," he says, taking a step back, raising his hand and spinning it in a circle. Within the span of a few seconds, everyone vanishes back into the woods, and they're left alone with Lori. John turns around in his seat and looks at Lori. "How did he know my name?" he asks her. "I think if we just head down the road, you'll find the answers you need," she says. "You could just tell me." "Please?" she says with a gentle smile. "Okay," John says, turning around and looking at Mary before putting the truck in gear. "Just go through the gate and head down the road," Lori says. "Got it." John presses the gas and they start moving, venturing deeper into the woods. Within a few seconds, they lose sight of the gate. The trees start becoming thicker and thicker on both sides of the road the further they drive. "Are you a good guy?" Jake asks Lori. She looks at him, a slightly confused look on her face. "I think so." "We're good guys," he replies. "I can see that." Robin is sitting just studying Lori, her arms loosely crossed, as if she hasn't decided what she thinks of her yet. "I'm Mary," Mary says, offering her hand over the top of the seat. Lori shakes it and smiles. "This is Jake and Robin." "Nice to meet you all." "You too," Jake replies, but Robin remains silent and withdrawn. "Is this the homestead we were looking for?" Mary asks, trying her luck at prying some sort of answer out of the young woman. If you don't mind, I would prefer if you waited until we arrived to answer any questions. John spots an intersection coming up, where one branch turns to the right, and the other bears left. Take the left, Lori says, leaning forward slightly, so she can see out the windshield. Okay, John replies as he turns the wheel. How far is it? Mary asks. Not far. John continues driving, glancing at Lori in the rear view every few minutes. The trees begin to thin out a little, but there's still literally nothing to see but leaves and trunks as they continue along the gravel road. How long have you guys been here? John asks, figuring that he wouldn't get an answer. I've been here about 17 years, she replies. I take it some of your people knew my father, or at least knew of him. For a moment, she doesn't answer, and John figures he pushed his luck too far. But then she catches his eye in the rear view. Oh yeah, he's well known in these parts. John slows down as the road appears to widen slightly in the distance, and the trees begin to recede. It's right up there, Lori says, pointing over the back of the front seat. John peers through the windshield where she's pointing. The trees end abruptly, and they roll into a wide open space that seems like it was literally carved out of the forest. A huge white and black farmhouse, flanked by two massive barns, lies directly ahead, while dozens of smaller outbuildings dot the property in virtually every direction, including a smaller, more primitive-looking cabin located behind the main house. Holy shit, John mutters. Is this it? Mary asks, staring wide-eyed out her window. That's the cabin over there, John says, pointing to it. But the rest of this never looked like this. Maybe they made some improvements, I'll say. You can pull up in front of the house if you want, Lori says. More than a dozen people turn and watch as the Scout rolls past the first few buildings and up to the house. The ages of the residents range from as young as 5 or 6, all the way to men and women in their late 70s and 80s. Is this your place, Grandpa? Robin asks. I think so. I thought you said it was just a house and a barn, Mary says. I did, it was. John stops in front of the house and shuts off the engine. Lori climbs out and closes the door gently before walking over to the huge wraparound porch of the farmhouse. Are we getting out? Robin asks. I guess so, John says, and they all climb out, leaving Max in the back seat, although he sticks his head out the window. The front door of the house opens and an older gentleman with close-cropped gray hair and a neatly trimmed goatee emerges, accompanied by 2 others. A tall, lanky young man with dark hair and a middle-aged woman with short red hair and a serious expression on her face. Lori steps over to the trio and speaks to them, their conversation muted. A few seconds later, the older man descends the steps and walks over to the Scout, his dark blue eyes scanning John and the others. John? He asks. He just nods in response. I think we need to talk. I think we do, John replies. Chapter 17. This is the Homestead, right? The older man nods as they stand by the Scout. It is. Owned by Trevor Williamson? Correct. The man puts his hands up and smiles warmly at John. I think introductions would be in order before we go any further, he says. Sure, you already know my name, John says. This is Mary, my daughter, and her kids, Robin and Jake. Max barks from the back seat, and John grins. And that's Max. It's a pleasure to meet you all, he says. My name is Ray, and this is Anna and Gregory. He points to the 2 people who had emerged from the house with him. You already met Lori, I see. We did, John replies, looking over at the young woman and giving her a small nod of the head, which she returns. Are you all hungry? Talk is better spent over a meal and with a full stomach, Ray says, sounding like some sort of wise guru. I think we could all eat something besides beef jerky and potato chips. Hell yeah, Jake says, and Ray chuckles. Well, let's see what we can pull together on short notice, Ray says. Anna and Gregory haven't moved from their position on the porch, and her gaze feels relentless as they approach the house. He notices that Ray looks in her direction, and then she finally turns away as she and Gregory move to the far end of the porch, conversing about something John can't make out. I take it it's been a while since you've been here, Ray says, as he opens the front door and holds it. That would be an understatement. The main staircase takes up the majority of the space in the foyer, with its white and blue treads and risers. A little antique table in the corner supports a wooden bowl, where a couple of sets of keys reside. After Mary and the kids are inside, Ray closes the door and points down the hall. Straight ahead to the kitchen, he says. John nods and walks down the short hallway, glancing to the left in the spacious front room and dining room. The furnishings aren't fancy, but they aren't cheap either. The white cabinets and butcher block countertop in the kitchen are exactly what you might expect in a farmhouse, as is the large island in the center of the room, surrounded by a dozen tall stools. The stove is covered with pots, some of them still steaming, and the sound of someone working in the next room can be heard. It's beautiful, Mary says, looking at the bright, cheery kitchen. Thank you. We do the best we can. We took out more modern appliances and replaced them with simpler units, Ray says, gesturing to the two stoves. They look to be from the 1960s, or maybe even earlier. These look like the same ones my dad had in the cabin originally. They are. The other ones were too reliant on computers and more complicated electronics. So they might have a chance to survive an EMP burst, Mary says. Exactly. The same thing with the refrigerators. For the first time, John looks up and notices the overhead light. You have electricity? We have some limited use, mostly to power the kitchen appliances and a few critical lights. Solar? Robin asks. Yes. It's a relatively crude setup, but it's still effective. The EMP didn't destroy it. So, it was an EMP, Ray says, as if he was unsure. As far as we know. He nods and then frowns. That's what we were afraid of. Several of our unprotected electrical devices were damaged or completely destroyed, but we weren't really sure. But not the solar power system? Trevor, your dad, had it protected with a Faraday type of insulation. We had to replace a few small parts, but it's still working as of today. What's a Faraday? Mary asks. It's a kind of insulation that can protect electronic devices from an EMP burst. An attractive older woman with gray hair and a quick smile walks into the kitchen with a few small plates in her hands. These are our guests? She asks, smiling at John and family. Yes, dear, Ray says. This is John, Mary, Robin, and Jake, and Max is in the car. This is my wife, Linda. Max isn't eating with us? He's our dog, John says with a grin. Oh, she says, laughing at herself, and everyone joins in. Well, we should eat while the food is still hot. If you can stop talking for a moment, Ray. I was just answering their questions, he says. We'll have time for that later, she replies. While outwardly she seemed friendly and jovial, there is something behind her amber eyes that hints at an inner strength. Let's head into the dining room and we can continue our discussion and fill our bellies at the same time, Ray says, gesturing toward the next room. You didn't have to go to all this trouble for us, Mary says. And how did you get it all cooked so fast? It was no trouble. Most of it was already cooked for late lunches and dinner. I just took a few portions for us, Linda replies. So, you've been here how long? John asks, before taking a bite of a small biscuit. Linda and I came here close to 25 years ago, Ray replies. That's around the last time I saw my father. Yes, it was after that last time you visited that he began expanding the place. And he recruited you or offered you a job? Mary asks. She reaches across the table and takes a few roasted carrots and puts them on her plate. It was sort of both at the same time. How many people do you have here now? 16. Wow. And you all live here full-time? Yes. Linda picks up the bowl of mashed potatoes and offers them to Jake. Did you want some more, honey? I could do that, he replies, before taking it and spooning some into his plate next to his chicken leg. Be careful. He might eat you out of house and home, Mary says, chuckling while Jake rolls his eyes. It's okay. Growing boys need their energy. That's right, Jake says, and Mary just shakes her head. What about you, dear? She says, turning to Robin. I'm okay, she replies quietly, while toying with the tiny bit of food on her plate. Mary looks at her, and she looks away, pretending to study something on the wall. So, what happened after you moved here? John asks. Well, your father taught us how to survive, how to grow our own food, build what we needed from what we had, and become self-sufficient. Over the course of the last 2 decades, we've expanded the farm, put up more buildings, and become more than even he imagined. You have contact with the outside world, though, right? Of course. There are things we need that we can't build or make ourselves, like medicine and first aid supplies, gasoline, among quite a few other items. How do you get out of here? Mary asks. The way we came in does not seem like a convenient way to come and go. Ray laughs after taking a drink of water from his glass. That's the back way in, so to speak, the old road. We have a regular driveway that leads out to the highway. It's on the other side of the farm. Can I ask how you found us? To be honest, I'd forgotten about this place, John says, until I got a letter from some lawyer saying that Dad had left me the property. The rest is just dumb luck and buried memories. I suppose we should talk about that, Ray says. About what? About your ownership. We're not going to throw you out, John says. It's not that. It's more about if we're going to throw you out. Chapter 18. Throw us out? Robin asks, perking up for the first time. Grandpa owns this place. Robin, hold on, John says, reaching over and placing his hand on her arm. His touch seems to calm her, but she still glares at Ray for a few seconds before crossing her arms and settling back in her chair. I'm not saying we're going to do that, but did you read everything in your father's will? John looks at Mary, and she frowns at him. No, I can't say that I did. Ray nods and sighs. When he first got sick, your father told me that he was going to leave the homestead to you. I was shocked. I mean, you two hadn't even talked in more than 20 years that I knew of. We had many discussions about his decision, but he was adamant that you should inherit what he built. I didn't know anything about any of this, John said. I know. After a while, I think he began to understand why I and several other people in our little community were upset. This was our home. We had helped build it, maintain it, expand it, and we also grieved when there were losses, be they people, animals, or things. So we made an agreement. What sort of agreement? He placed a rider in his will that said if you didn't come forward and claim the property within 3 years, that ownership would revert to us, Ray says. His tone is friendly, and his expression is full of understanding. You told me you got the letter 10 years ago, Mary says. John nods and takes a deep breath. So, what does this mean? He asks. Ray sighs and then looks at Robin, leaning forward slightly so that she understands that he's talking to her as well. First off, we're not going to throw you out. That's not what this place is about, he says, looking over at Linda. She nods and smiles at the kids. You're welcome to stay with us for as long as you want. she says. I take it that this EMP attack or burst or whatever it was is wreaking havoc out there, Ray says. You could say that. I'm sure it'll be repaired at some point, but who knows how long that'll be. So, as Linda said, you're welcome to stay with us as long as you want, until things are back to normal, or even after if that's what you decide. Is that okay? He asks, looking at Robin. She sits up straighter in her chair again and leans forward, just as he did. I guess that could work for me, she replies, still sullen. And for us as well, John says, looking over at Mary, who nods her agreement. There is one condition, however, Ray continues. What is that? You have to contribute. You have to pull your weight. What does that mean? Jake asks. It means you're going to have to work around the farm, Linda says. Do you have animals? He asks, his eyes lighting up. We do. Cows, chickens, goats, and horses. Robin perks up again, her eyes widening. You have horses? She asks, trying to hide her excitement, but failing. We do. Deal, she says, offering her hand. Ray laughs and leans across the table and shakes her much smaller hand before looking at John and Mary. Does that work for you? He asks. Can we get back to you in the morning? He replies, while grinning as he looks over at Robin. You can stay in here tonight, Linda says, as she opens one of the doors of the top of the stairs in the main house. Tomorrow we'll find you some more permanent accommodations. Thank you, John says. We appreciate it. You're quite welcome, she says, before slowly closing the door. The large bedroom has 6 single beds arranged in 2 rows, each one with a small nightstand next to it. A single light fixture hanging from the ceiling casts a pale yellow pall across the entire room. Max runs into the room and lays down on one of the rugs, quickly curling into a ball. Jake flops down on the mattress farthest from the door and sighs. Tired? Mary asks. Yeah. We should all get some sleep, John says. Are we going to be staying here for sure? Robin asks, after sitting down on the bed next to Jake's. I don't know yet. Maybe we should talk about it before we go to sleep, John says. Should we take a quick vote? Mary asks. Sure. So who wants to stay? John asks everyone while standing near the door. Surprisingly, everyone raises their hand, and John stares at them. Jake? Hey, I like Linda and Ray. She makes good biscuits. John shakes his head and looks at Robin. You too? They have horses, Robin says. But 15 minutes ago you were sitting at that table, your arms crossed, ready to bolt at a moment's notice. Did you hear what I said? They have horses. Mary? I mean, where else are we going to go? Even if there is a town somewhere nearby, it's probably in the same shape as home. Maybe worse. Here we would have food, shelter, protection. You all do understand what staying here means, right? You heard what Ray said. Everyone contributes. That means working hard and not complaining. Can you all do that? Jake and Robin nod their understanding in agreement. Okay, I guess that's settled. We should turn in. I have a feeling that tomorrow is going to be a busy day, John says. About an hour later, Jake and Robin are snoring softly in their beds, the 2 windows open, letting a cool breeze drift through the room. John is lying on his back, staring at the ceiling, trying to decide if this whole thing is a good idea or not. You asleep? Mary asks from the bed next to his. He turns on his side and looks at her, a few streaks of moonlight illuminating her face. Not really. You okay? I'm fine. I think the bigger question is, are you okay? Mary asks. He sighs and frowns at her. I don't really know. How are you feeling about this whole thing? It's hard to say. They seem like good people. Some of them scarier than others, but they seem like they mean well. I'd agree with that. How are you feeling about them owning your place? I guess it's not really my place. I had my chance. I suppose it's too late to get a lawyer, Mary says, smiling at him. Probably. I guess having a place to stay is better than having no place, Mary says. Things are only going to get worse before they get better. I'd say that was an accurate assumption. Well then, we should get some sleep. It's going to be a busy day tomorrow. I think I heard that somewhere. Good night, Dad. Good night, baby. Chapter 19. So you've decided to stay? Ray asks, as he and John are standing on the back porch of the house, watching the sunrise in the distance. We have. Ray nods and takes a sip of coffee from his mug. You don't sound very enthusiastic. John looks at him and then turns his gaze back to the rising sun. It's sort of odd, feeling like a guest on my own land. I get that. Try not to think about it like that. How should I think about it? Ray stands for a moment before answering. You got me there. I really have no idea. Just don't let it bother you. That's probably easier said than done. I suppose so. Anyway, let's take the tour I was talking about. Linda is busy helping Mary and the kids get set up someplace more permanent. Okay, lead the way. Ray nods and steps down off the porch, setting his mug on the top of the railing before heading toward the barn on the right side of the house. It's a massive structure, even larger than the house. They walk inside, and the smell of horses and other farm animals hits John hard. You'll have to get used to that, Ray says, seemingly unfazed by the odor. It's just been a while. It does bring back memories. I'm sure. So, we have about a dozen horses, he says, as they walk down the aisle between the stalls. 3 horses are standing in their little booths, watching them with their large, soulful eyes. Robin seems excited to work with them, John says. Wait till she has to muck out a stall. We'll see how long that excitement lasts. John laughs as they reach the doors at the far end of the barn. They step outside and Ray points off to the west, where a huge expanse of rolling hills seem to go on forever, a sort of green carpet carved out of the forest. We have about 50 head of cattle, some for milk and some for meat, he says. Let's head over to... A large bell starts ringing, and Ray grabs John's arm. Come with me, he says, and they start racing toward the front of the house. Ray moves quickly for his age, and when they stop in front of the porch, he doesn't seem out of breath. The same can't be said for John. What is it, Anna? Ray asks, the fierce-looking young woman with the red hair. He's back. Ray shakes his head and frowns. Get Victor, Lori, and Gregory and meet me by the front gate, he says, as she rushes off. What's happening? John asks. 1 second, Ray says, holding up his hand as a young man with curly brown hair and a youthful face comes running up to them, with 2 rifles in hand. Thanks. I want you to get to the tower and take over the watch. Yes, sir, the man says, and takes off running around the side of the house, after handing the weapons to Ray. What is going on, Ray? Can you shoot? Of course I can shoot. Then come with me. They start toward what looks like the main entrance that Ray was talking about the day before. A long driveway that winds into the trees, its end point concealed by the thick forest. Various people are running here and there, rounding up stray animals, in a few cases, children, as the bell continues to ring. Wait, let's take the Scout, John suggests. They race back to the truck and are climbing in when the front door of the house opens and Mary emerges. What's going on? She asks. Some sort of emergency. We'll be back, John says before closing the door. They start down the driveway, which is much nicer than the overgrown trail that they followed. They catch up to Lori, who's jogging down the gravel road on the right side. Get in, John says, slowing down enough for her to open the door and jump into the back seat. Thanks, she says as she leans forward, watching out the windshield. Is someone going to tell me what the hell is going on? John asks. Lori looks at Ray, and he frowns. It's sort of a family disagreement. Stop here, Ray says, and John pulls over to the side and cuts the engine. The front gate is about 30 yards farther down the track. You said you know how to shoot, right? Ray asks John as they're climbing out. I can shoot. John examines the rifle for the first time, checking the bolt action and ejecting the magazine before slapping it back in place. A Ruger American, he says, before slinging it over his shoulder. You know your rifles. I've shot a few. Come on, enough chit-chat, we gotta go, Lori says, before all three of them start jogging down the driveway toward the gate. When they're about 10 yards away, a tall man with dark skin and short black hair comes walking over. He's carrying what looks to be a Kel-Tec Sub 2000, easily spotted due to the odd gap on the stock where the weapon can be folded in half. Where are they, Dean? Just across the highway, he replies, his voice deep and intimidating. He looks at John, his eyes scanning him up and down for a few seconds. This him? He asks, staring straight at him as he speaks. This is him, John replies, locking eyes with him and refusing to back down. They look alike. I'm right here. You can talk to me. Oh, yeah, sorry. Anyway, he said he wants to talk to you, he says to Ray. All right, let's go see what he wants. They all jog slowly down the driveway. When they reach the gate, it's much bigger than John was expecting. It's made of metal and constructed between two soaring columns of stone. It's hard to tell if they're a natural occurrence or man-made, but either way, they're impressive. The trees on either side of the stone columns are extra thick, as if they had been planted that way on purpose. A young woman is standing by one of the stone pillars, a rifle in her hand and a pistol tucked into her belt. She gives Ray a nod as they approach. Stacia, Ray says. Are they making any aggressive moves? No, she replies. They're just waiting for you. How many? It's him and 4 others. Okay, stay back here and cover us. Yes, sir. Ray turns to John. You can stay with her if you want. I came all this way. I'm not going to stand back here. Good, come on. Ray, Dean, Lori, and John step up to the gate, and he gets his first view of their unwanted visitors. 3 older model cars are parked along the shoulder of the southbound lane, on the opposite side of the road. John can see 3 men, 2 standing near the vehicles and a third in the middle of the road, his hands clasped behind his back. I thought Stacia said there were 4, John says, scanning the area for anyone lurking in the trees. She did, Ray says. Keep an eye out. Raymond, the man in the middle of the highway says. He has short blonde hair, shaved close on the sides, but longer on top. He's dressed in jeans, a red pullover shirt, and black cowboy boots. John takes note of the bulge on the side of his left boot. Zeke, what do you want? You know what I want. Ray sighs and shakes his head. And you know it's not going to happen. Zeke lowers his head for a moment before looking back at Ray. I see you have some new recruits, Zeke says, looking directly at John, who returns his gaze. Ray glances at John. If that's all you came for, I'm afraid you wasted your time. I actually came to show you how serious I am. He turns slightly and nods to someone behind him. A 4th man appears, pushing a young woman in front of him. Her hands are bound, and blood is trickling down the left side of her face. Rebecca! Ray shouts. John looks at Ray, and then back at the young woman. She's pushed to the ground in front of Zeke, and he retrieves a pistol from behind his back and pulls the slide back. Dean raises his rifle, pointing it at the intruders. Time seems to slow as John takes a step back and plants his left foot behind him, shifting it back and forth in the gravel until it feels grounded. He raises his rifle, opens the scope covers, chambers around, and sights Zeke, the reticule centered on his chest. "I don't think you understand me," Zeke says as he places the barrel of the pistol against the young woman's head. "Don't do this," Ray pleads. "I'm not doing it. You are," Zeke shouts. John shifts his aim to the right slightly, takes a breath, and holds it. Every tiny movement around him seems magnified. He can hear the rustling of Ray's shirt, and the sound of Dean taking a step sounds like an explosion. He watches through the scope as Zeke's finger begins squeezing the trigger, and John fires. "Fuck!" Zeke shouts as he drops his weapon. The sound of the shot echoes through the woods as he stumbles away from the girl, nursing his right hand. His other men scatter, ducking for cover behind their vehicles, and Zeke follows suit. John drops the rifle and leaps over the fence. He draws his pistol and runs towards the girl. "Rebecca, run!" he shouts to her while waving her to him. She jumps up and dashes across the road toward the gate. John spots one of Zeke's men raising his rifle, and he fires 3 shots while running. 2 go wild, but the third shatters the window next to the man, and he jumps into the car and peels out, throwing a shower of gravel on his companions. When Rebecca reaches John, he grabs her arm and starts retreating back to the gate. Dean and Lori jump the fence, watching the other cars as they pull away. They roar down the highway and disappear into the trees within a few minutes. "Thank you," Rebecca says as she throws her arms around John's neck. He pats her back gently. "You're welcome." A second later, Stacia comes running up and the 2 girls embrace and then kiss while John and the others look on. "Thank you for what you did," Stacia says to John, tears in her eyes. "I just did what was right," he replies, before turning to Ray. "I told you I could shoot." Chapter 20. "Now can you tell me who the hell that was?" John asks, while he and Ray are driving back to the house, with Lori in the back seat. Stacia and Rebecca said they were going to walk back to get her checked out. "Can I say that was impressive first?" Lori asks. "Thanks," John says, "but I need an explanation now." "I'm not sure where to begin," Ray says. "Try the beginning." He sighs and closes his eyes for a moment before continuing. "Zeke was one of us at one time," he says. "I kinda picked up on that. He had his problems." "He was a fucking nutcase," Lori says. Ray turns and looks at her, and she shrugs. "What? He was? Didn't you just see that? He was going to kill Rebecca. In my book, that's a fucking nutcase." "Thank you, Lori. Can I continue?" Ray asks. "Sure, sorry," she says. John pulls into the spot in front of the house and cuts the engine. Mary comes running down the steps up to the driver's door. "What happened? I heard gunshots," she says. "Your dad is totally a fucking badass," Lori says, smiling at her as she climbs out and heads into the house. "Lori!" Ray calls to her. She stops and turns while holding the door open. "Find out how the hell Rebecca got caught by them." "Will do, as soon as they get back here," she says, before stepping inside. "It was just a run-in with a former resident," John says while opening his door. "It sounds like more to me." "Let's head inside and talk. I think I need a drink," Ray says as he comes around to the driver's side. "It's a little early," Mary says. "I think we can overlook that today." They walk into the house behind Ray, and a moment later, Robin and Jake come bounding down the stairs. "Are you okay?" Jake asks while hugging John around the waist. "I'm fine, buddy," he replies, patting him on the back. "We heard shots," Robin says. There was a problem. Your granddad resolved it, Ray says. Everything is okay now. Yeah, it's all okay. Hey, did you check out the horses? Mary asks Robin. Not yet. I was going to when we got herded upstairs. Well, why don't you and Jake go out to the barn and see them? Hells yeah, she says, her face lightening up with excitement. She grabs Jake's arm and pulls him out the front door. All right, let's get that drink, Ray says. They walk into the kitchen, and Linda is sitting on one of the stools, a bottle of Jack in front of her along with 4 glasses. I think we all need a drink, she says. You read my mind, Ray says, as he steps up to her and plants a kiss on her forehead, before looking back at Mary and John. Take a seat. This may take a while. Linda slides a glass to each person, and then fills her own before settling the bottle back in the center of the island. As I said, Zeke used to be one of us. He and his wife came here about 12 years ago. It was a few years before your father's death. He never trusted him, but I convinced him to let Zeke and his wife stay. He didn't know a lot about farming or ranching, but he caught on quick. His wife was the same way. She loved to cook, but she wasn't very good. But she was eager to learn, and she got better and better, Linda adds. They seemed happy here. They seemed like a happy couple. Ray nods and takes a swig of his whiskey. Until that night in November, he says, his voice heavy with regret. What happened in November? Mary asks, leaning forward like she's listening to a fireside story. Jennifer vanished. That was her name. She just disappeared in the middle of the night. During the worst blizzard we'd seen in these parts in more than 50 years, Ray says. I remember that, Mary says. You and Stephen had to come rescue me when my car got stuck in a snowdrift. Yeah, John says, smiling to himself. That was a bad one. We sent out multiple search parties, but the storm was just too intense, and we had to give it up after a few hours. We questioned Zeke, but he said when they went to bed everything was normal, and then he woke up around 1 a.m. and she was gone. And you believed him? John asks. Some did, at first. What do you mean, at first? We couldn't really do much for a couple of months. Winters up here are brutal. We can get up to 20 feet of snow during a season. A lot of us were skeptical about his story, but there wasn't much we could do, Ray says. Your dad knew something was wrong, but by then he was sick and he had handed over the day-to-day operations to Ray, Linda says. So, things went on as normal for the next few months. Winter turned to spring and the snow began to recede, and suddenly one morning, one of our dogs comes back with a bone in his mouth. A human bone. Ray nods, a sad expression on his face. Yeah, we sent out a couple of search parties again, and within a few hours they located her body. There wasn't much left. We only identified her by the jacket she had on. So, that sounds like his story might have been true, Mary says. Maybe she wandered out in the blizzard for some reason and got lost. He nods and sighs. There are a few among us that thought that he was innocent, but they were definitely in the minority. I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt, although I personally felt that he had killed her. But we had no proof. It was just his word against, well, it was just his word. Your dad always thought he had done it, Linda adds, while swirling the light brown liquid around in her glass. Dad had that way about him. He could really read people, John says. Anyway, time passed, and events fade into the background, as they tend to do. Your father's illness finally took him, and I was placed in charge of the place. Zeke moved on, too. He fell for another one of our group, and just as he had with Jennifer, things seemed happy. Until, Mary says, her tone grim. Yeah, until. It was the middle of the night, and Anna burst into the main house. She had a broken arm, lacerations on her face and neck, multiple bruises, and other contusions. She said that Zeke had done it. A bunch of us headed over to his cabin, and when we found him, he was unconscious on the floor, a knife by his side and bruises on his knuckles. And that was it for us. We locked him up in one of the horse stalls until he sobered up, while we had a meeting to discuss his future. There was a lot of yelling, back and forth, accusations were thrown about, and unfounded and disturbing rumors were brought to light concerning both Jennifer and Anna, none of which could be proven, and even when confronted, those who espoused the ideas couldn't or wouldn't say where they had come from. In the end, I decided to banish him, permanently. We gave him a supply of food, his personal belongings, and dropped him off at the closest town, Buellton, about 15 miles from here. When we got back, there were about 10 people who had packed up their things and left while we were gone. They stole one of our trucks and left while everyone else was busy. Supporters of his? John asks. Yes, all of them. It wasn't long after that he started showing up at the gate demanding to be let in, screaming that the homestead had been stolen from him and that he was the true heir to the land. Today was different. This is the first time that he threatened someone other than me. He didn't threaten her, John says. He was going to kill her in the street. You didn't tell us about this, Mary says. That you have some sort of feud going on where people could be killed? No, and I apologize for that. I figured I had time to explain it before you would have to witness it for yourself. If y'all want to leave, you're more than free to go, he says, just as the back door to the kitchen opens, and Robin walks in alongside a young girl who looks to be about her age. Free to go? She asks, frowning at the adults gathered around the island. Robin, we're just talking, Mary says. We're not leaving, she shouts, and runs out through the door again. Robin's new friend stands there awkwardly for a few seconds, unsure what to do. Go find her, Erin, he says, and she nods before rushing out the door after her. Okay then, Mary says, standing slowly. I guess I'll be back. Chapter 21. Robin, Mary says into the wide-open space of the horse barn. No one answers, the only sound coming from a couple of horses shifting around in their stalls. She walks down the wide aisle that runs from one end of the barn to the other, glancing left and right as she moves. Are you in here? She calls out again. I'm not leaving, Robin says from somewhere nearby, her voice echoing through the vast space. Nobody said we were leaving. Ray literally just said we were free to go. Free to go means go, she responds. Where are you, honey? We should talk. Silence falls again across the barn for a few seconds. Okay, Mary hears her whisper, before falling silent again. Last stall on the right. Mary walks down to the end of the aisle and opens the door. Robin and her new friend, Erin, are sitting in the corner on a bale of hay. I told her to talk to you, Erin says. I was going to anyway, Robin adds, pouting at her. Uh-huh. She gets up and starts to leave, before stopping and turning. Come find me later. We can go for a walk or something. Okay. Thank you, Erin. You're welcome, she replies, before heading out of the stall. I don't want to leave, Robin says, locking eyes with her mother. I know you don't. Can we talk? We can, but I'm not changing my mind. I told you, I'm not leaving. Mary sighs and sits down on the other end of the bale, leaving a space between them. We were having a discussion about something that happened today, Mary says. That's what you heard. Okay, so what happened? Someone who used to live here came back. He wants to take over the place. So you tell him no. They have told him no. He won't listen. And today he came back with some other people, and they were going to kill a girl who lives here. What? Is she okay? She asks, her eyes wide, and her voice full of concern. Yeah, your grandfather actually saved her. She stares at her for a moment, and then she nods. Is that why you were talking about leaving? Yes, this man. He's dangerous. He killed someone before and hurt another one, and he's going to come back. That's what Ray meant when he said we were free to go. Because when we decided to stay here, we didn't know this thing was going on. Robin nods, and her expression becomes thoughtful and serious. We have to help them, she says. Why? We don't really know them. We've only been here one day. Does that really matter? No, I guess not. We already had to leave one home, she says. And Mary starts to say something, but Robin puts her hand up. I know why we had to, and I'm good with that. But then we get here, and it seems like a great place, and you're talking about leaving. The people are nice. The food's pretty good. And they have horses, Mary says with a smile. Exactly. Besides, we have to help them because it's the right thing to do. We're staying, Mary says. She walks back into the kitchen, with Robin beside her. John, Ray, and Linda look over at her. That's what I was just saying, John says. Without talking to me? Mary replies. I told them I already knew what you were going to say. That's a risky strategy. It was more like a safe bet. It was my idea, Robin says, turning to Ray and Linda. You need help, and we're going to help you. We appreciate that, Robin, Ray says. Thank you. You're welcome, she says, before turning to Mary. Can I go find Aaron? Sure. Robin smiles and darts out of the room, and Mary looks at John. Do you think we should have talked to Jake about it? I think I know what his answer will be, John says. Yeah, probably. Okay, John says, looking at Ray. We need to come up with some plans to beef up the defensive capabilities of this place. I don't really have any experience with that, Ray says, frowning. Don't worry, I do. Desert Storm and Iraq Invasion, 2 tours, John says. That's how you know how to shoot. John smiles. It's like riding a bike. I think that... Ray is interrupted by Stacia opening the front door and sticking her head inside. Hey, John, can I show you something out here? She asks. John looks at Ray and he shrugs. Sure, John replies, getting to his feet and heading to the door, followed by Mary and the others. As soon as he steps onto the porch, he freezes. More than a dozen people are gathered in front of the house, including Rebecca, who is standing front and center, her face bedecked with a bandage. All at once, everyone begins clapping, and Rebecca walks over and climbs up onto the deck. I wanted to officially thank you for what you did, she says. Stacia steps over and takes Rebecca's hand before they both embrace John, their arms wrapped tightly around him. Mary looks at Ray and grins. News travels fast, she says. Apparently. Linda wipes her eyes and joins in the clapping, which is yet to end. Stacia and Rebecca finally release him and take a small step back. This wasn't really necessary, John says, as he feels a blush run across his face. I just did what I needed to do. Not everyone does that, Rebecca replies. Well, you're welcome, he says, somewhat awkwardly. Okay, everyone, Ray says, stepping forward and putting his arm on John's shoulder. I think we all have work to do. As the crowd begins to break up, many of them pass in front of the deck, shaking hands with John, until he's forced to descend the steps to deal with all the additional hugs and handshakes. Anna, one of the last to leave, stops in front of John, and he leans back slightly. I'm sorry about the way I treated you when you first arrived, she says. I wasn't sure if you were going to be another Zeke, wanting to take over and all. Did you treat me poorly? He asks. I hadn't noticed, since you seemed to ignore me for the most part. She stands there, and a frown begins to form on her face, before John begins smiling, and then she follows suit before shaking her head. Yeah, I see what you did there. Funny. Hey, I do what I can. You don't need to apologize for anything. There was one thing that I did want to ask you. Sure. Why didn't you just kill him? Everybody gets one, he replies. It may still come to that, though. Don't think you'll get much pushback on that. I didn't think so. Well, I'll leave you be for now. If you need anything, let me know, she says, before starting to walk away. Anna. She stops and turns back to face him. We've got a lot of work to do, if you're willing. I'm willing. Good, he says, stepping back up on the porch. Let's talk.